Thanks for coming. This is the second Agôn, as you know, or maybe you don't, but it is the second. But also it's the third grouping of the people with like minds coming together to talk about arts research, which is really interesting. And I'm very glad to see that we're widening our constituencies. Actually, people are coming not just from the arts department, but from everywhere else. So, and this is what we would like to do. We want to reach out to a wider audience, because we know that in the university there's a lot of stuff happening within the arts, related to the arts, which is sometimes only known to smaller groups of people. So I want to do that. And as you know, I'm very interested, and I've written a lot about all this stuff. So I would like to kind of today, I don't want to repeat myself like what I did last time, because also we're videoing these things. And I can tell you that there's a lot of colleagues actually of mine, not just from America but also from abroad, who are interested, and when they see some of the stuff happening, they are really intrigued, and they want to work with us. I mean, we're trying to plan, for example, an Arts Agôn in the fall. We want to work in collaboration with our colleagues from Portugal. The only thing which might hold them back is funding, but I mean, we're hoping that they can kind of, there might be 3 or 4 colleagues, and I'm hoping that we have our own colleagues here as well, so we can sort of start developing. But anyway, I was looking at the presentations today, and I wanted to kind of offer some points of reflection with you today, which I hope they won't be too controversial. So, I wanted to kind of, I want to offer some points of reflection on this second Arts Agôn, where we are gradually creating and widening a space of inquiry together by coming together as arts practitioners, and by showing how we continue to challenge the boundaries that are often imposed on us, starting with a rigid notion of research, and especially when we are pushed into narrow methods, or the arts sometimes are pushed to borrow methods which actually don't really kind of link up with them. But I mean, sometimes we do that, and we know that that's very prevalent. Whether it's social sciences or whether it's any other kind of model, people just say, okay, we can use this model for the arts, and we know that it doesn't always work. So here we are suggesting and exploring an ever-widening notion of the arts, or what the arts and what art practice might mean to us. And we want to make sure that these terms are not closed by the fact that someone feels uncomfortable with the claim for arts research beyond the methods of acceptability or legitimation. In fact, we know that arts research as a term is quite wide, but also sometimes it's not very comfortable, and people like us who work with that, sometimes we have to explain ourselves of what we mean by it. And if we are to talk about arts research, we know that it means a lot of things to different people, but here the difference must be accentuated. And to paraphrase Hannah Arendt, you could argue that because we are the same, we are very different. And this sameness, this commonality, is not homogenized, closed, or indeed walled into some kind of an assumption of what the definition of the arts or arts research should be. Rather, actually, the sameness, this commonality, is something which accentuates our difference, especially when arts research is looked at as an ever-changing generative approach and definition. And this could make people who are too safe in what they do uncomfortable, but on the other hand, I think we need to kind of take that risk. So to me, research means finding. And I'm not claiming to be original in this. Picasso was known, I don't do research, I just find. I just do things. And often the finding comes first, even before the looking for something, before the searching. And this is because in the old logic of the ancients, the finding comes before, logically speaking, the searching. And that the finding is what causes the searching. We are prompted to search because we want to find something. I'm not sure what we're going to find, but we want to find something. And we search in order to find. The finding is what causes research, not the other way around, as sometimes the empiricists and some other social scientists want us to believe. And this is where we get into trouble. Now, in art, we can alter any order by which we have received or generated this finding. And yet, more often than not, we have learned to do things in one way, and we seem to be reluctant to use our ability to challenge what we have learned. Unfortunately, our art education has been schooled in a different logic, that of empirical results. Our research is being schooled in measure and in quantified terms. What we're supposed to say, what is art and what it looks like, has been carefully schooled into a notion of creativity, even, that some would describe and measure by externalized forms of legitimation. In the schooled art practice and research, and I accentuate the schooled definition of it, we have been now told that creativity should work. So creativity suddenly became a kind of fashionable. It's strange how we are told it must be free, when in fact the freedom of creativity is used as a measure to justify why we do art, especially in schools. This kind of legitimation has not worked, and we know this because art education is a continuing struggle. If we're not against its schooling, it's the other way around. We want to have art in schools, and that's very confusing sometimes. The creative ways by which we were taught to do art, even the open-ended myth of a studio pedagogy sometimes, was enough for us to believe this fallacy of a creativity that has become increasingly constructivist or constructionist. The line was so creative, schooling was so creative, that creativity itself became a formula, often an instructional set of rules of how to be creative. Even freedom has become pedagogical. In educational and social scientific jargon, they call it social constructivism or learner-centered education, and often we think that's right. No, it's benign, of course, how can you go against that? But then when you start digging and looking around it, you find it actually is the other way around. It says one thing, but it does another. And Dewey was talking about this even in the 1930s about liberalism. So creativity, like everyone, or like everything, including matters spiritual and sacred, has become an outright lie. We see this in how sometimes the academic model is still being imposed on us, just as the conservatoire model has become ossified. And this is an irony because originally both the academy and the conservatoire were intended and meant to go against the ossification that they were challenging. So to me, arts research must start as a challenge to the lie of constructivist creativity, and therefore as a form of unlearning what we deem to be creative. Does this mean that we are not or should not be creative? Does it mean we should not advocate, or should start advocating a didactic form of schooling? Or does it mean that art should be taught or learned in a certain way? On the contrary, it means the opposite. To be creative, we must first start with doubting that which is presented to us as being creative, whether it's in a school, in a university, in an academy, or in the so-called discourse of the culture creative industries. This doubt is one of those viable points of departure for arts research. By dint of this doubt, we begin to gain a more autonomous and therefore more radical notion of the creative. To me, arts research, and with it any approach to creativity, must begin by, first, undoing the creativity that we have learned, and secondly, approaching arts research as a form of unlearning. So today, actually, we have 4 presentations and 4 approaches to the arts, which I try to kind of look at as the first one being having to do with the visible, the second one having to do with shadows, the third one with placemaking, and the fourth one with archiving. And I hope I got the order right. So, by the visible, I mean the act of art to reverse social invisibility. It is the ability, indeed the power, by which we could give voice to what Maxine Greene, she used to be my old friend, and I wrote a book about her, and she used to call the forgotten and the invisible. Those with whom we enter what she called in her book, The Dialectic of Freedom, she called it life's gas chamber, which she identifies with bureaucracy, the measured tyranny in governing bodies and public institutions, including schools. The second presentation, in terms of the shadows, which our second speaker has framed his research, I find a critical insight into the representational assumptions which we often find challenging us, especially when we think that they are benign. And this includes art and other forms of representation that often are taken as given. This givenness is the part of that fallacy of constructionist creativity which I referred to above. Arts research is a way of breaking open this and finding what lies in the shadow. Thirdly, as we continue to develop the whole discourse of place, we must also understand that this is never given, but has to be both found and made. There is an underlying need to understand how construction itself, and with it production, needs to be taken back, reappropriated from the cultural capital that has been accumulated, an accumulation which, as classical political economy reminds us, could be well used as a form of power and exploitation. To me, creative placemaking means going back to the shop floor, rather than entertaining ourselves in the market. Last but not least, it is this form of return which I see as an argument for the archive, which as a concept has been central to recent post-structuralist discourse, especially the works of both Derrida and Lyotard. Again, this like everything else, archives could mean everything to everyone. Although here I see a way of taking back history from those who seek to archive it only to keep it for themselves. We are taking back by holding this history in our hands rather than in the hands of the self-proclaimed leaders of an increasingly subsumed world. So I thank you all for coming, and I thank the colleagues who are presenting here. I hope this will continue to create wider spaces where arts research is seen in its unique and specific contribution to approach our world differently, dynamically, and most of all with a sense of claiming art's autonomous ways of sustaining its own paradoxes and thereby its infinite possibilities. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Richards and I'm the operations manager for the UW Community Arts Collaboratory, and ironically John gave us the title of visibility, and I've been known to be unable to find things that are in clear plastic bags in front of my face. So this will be interesting, but perhaps I'm better at unlearning than I thought. And with me today,
I'm Faisal, Abdu'Allah, Associate Professor in the Art Department and Director of the studio, the UW Learning Community.
and we're going to start with a little activity.
Now you're going to be facing each other.
Okay.
And what I want you to do, this is the magic circle here. You're going to step into that circle, and all you're going to say for me, everyone, is just tell me one state in the United States of America.
Oh.
And you're going to go to the back of that line. All right? When I say go. Yeah? Go.
Georgia. Arizona.
Illinois. Alaska. Washington.
Okay, that's just a warm-up. Right. So stand back a little. Right, so next thing I want you to do, you're going to step in, and we're going to start, this side is going to lead. And what you're going to say is a song that describes you. You're just going to step in, you're going to say the name of the song. You're going to stay there, and you're going to say the name of the song. You're like, what song is it? Don't worry. It's just a song that describes you today, at this moment. It's fine. I don't care how weird it is. I don't know if I've never heard of it. It doesn't matter. Yeah? Okay, go.
Finesse.
Who's it by?
Bruno Mars.
Okay.
Corby.
And you come.
Oklahoma.
By who?
Rodgers and Hammerstein. Thank you.
There you go. To the back. Next one.
Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison.
Arriving. And I made that up. That's not an actual.
That's good.
Itsy Bitsy Spider. I don't know who wrote it.
Sunny Side of the Street.
Happy New Year? Or, yeah, it's Chinese New Year.
Elevator operator.
Okay, so this is the final component. Now, this is the prerequisite. There is no question. You have to ask them a question. And you have to ask them a question. But you can't answer it. So it's just question, question. If you hesitate more than 2 seconds, you're done. You go to the back. So the person who keeps asking the question just stays there and keeps asking the question. You hesitate, you go to the back of the group. That's confusing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, so you're going to step up as a test. Step up. Ask the question.
What's your favorite color? What'd you have for dinner? When are you leaving? How long?
Right, step back. Right, that's fine. So, step back. So if you hesitate, you go to the back of the queue. I want it bang, 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 bang. No, step me along. So we're going to start. This is a competition.
Oh.
All right? Right, so you're going to step up.
Okay. Where'd you
Action.
choose? Where do you get your hair done?
That's where you are. Marina, you go.
Who's your mother? Do you know how to darn socks?
What day is it?
Do you remember the first time you tried putting contact lenses in your eyes?
What's your favorite color?
Do you remember a concert you were at where you thought I should have put earplugs in?
Who's in charge?
Do you drink regular or decaf coffee?
Go, Marina.
When you're at the dentist, what do you do to meditate?
Marina.
What do you do to wash your windows?
How many sides are in a square?
When was the last time you called someone you loved?
How many wheels are in a car?
What is the name of the youngest child you know?
How many books have you read?
How many fingers am I holding up?
How many fingers do you have?
How many hearts are on your shirt?
This is it.
What's your name?
How warm do you like to sleep at night?
What's my name?
When was the last time you washed your pillow?
What's the weather today?
When was the last time you went to a store to buy a belt?
What's your plan for weekend?
Have you ever tried to hang from the ceiling?
What did you eat for lunch?
Have you ever climbed through a hole that was too small for you?
Have you done skateboard?
Have you lay on your back and held a child above you on your feet?
Have you listened to classical guitar?
Do you grind your teeth?
Yes.
I was hoping at the end of this presentation that you would have more questions than answers, because curiosity is really at the root of both research and art. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Arts Collab. So we are a group of arts outreach programs based in the School of Education. And I'll tell you more about the 3 programs that are kind of came together to create the Arts Collab shortly. But together we're really hoping to be more efficient, to expand our reach, and to broaden our impact. And some of the things currently and in our future include sharing our evaluation practices, sharing our management. So my role is really to help with that efficiency of administering these programs, and to explore arts integration. So we're going to be piloting a fully arts integrated summer program this summer, and with the hopes of expanding that to rural schools as well. And also to combine and expand training for teaching artists, classroom educators, and artists. Those are just a few of the things that we're working on right now. And some of the things that we believe that really lend itself to the things that we're curious about are that we believe in the power of the arts to engage youth in learning as agents of their own creativity, intellect, and self-efficacy. And some of our questions about that are how does that happen, and to what extent or how much. And we also believe in the power of the arts to change teaching to more effectively engage and serve youth. And our questions about that are how best to translate and disseminate some of these best practices that we're learning in various educational settings, for instance, with various age groups, remedial education, enrichment education, summer school, regular school, after school, and so on. We also believe in the power of arts to turn students on to learning. And our question about that is, where is that most evident, and how do we see that happening in classrooms and in learning settings? We also believe in the power of the arts to give youth and communities more access to their creative selves, leading to better outcomes. And what does this look like, and how will we know that this is happening? So ultimately, we're hoping that through the arts, we're going to change communities. Faisal, anything to add? Because I have a couple videos to show.
I think I'll just say is that the activity that I've exposed you to is one that I do with the youths when they come into my studio for the first time. And I try to emphasize to them that school and universities are not the first places of learning. You can learn in many places. You can learn in this studio. And I talk a lot about my first learning institution, which was the barbershop. And I write about that experience, being around those kind of mature heads, being a 7-year-old person, and learning all this history about my culture. My parents came from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, and I was around all these elders who were speaking about Jamaica, and I had no idea about it, but I learned a myriad of information just from them. So it's getting them to understand where those sort of senses of learning are, and in some ways those questions that they were asking each other was a way of them beginning to empower themselves by when they see authority and they stop and they're asked a question, ask them back a question. What's your name? Well, what's your name? So it's a way of you can empower yourself by unlearning the idea of always trying to respond to what society is trying to say.
So the Arts Collab is comprised of currently three programs, including Bauhaus. So I'm going to show a couple of videos to highlight each of these 3 programs.
Are currently at an event called Too Much Sauce, and it is hosted by the Bauhaus Project.
This is a really emotional moment for me, watching this show come into existence. And everything you see and hear is the brain work of these young people here. The neons were designed by them, and we had them fabricated. The title was their title, Too Much Sauce.
He's helped us out a lot. He's taught us a lot of new things and opened our mind. I'd just like to thank you all myself for coming out here and seeing all the stuff that we did.
Thank you for coming tonight. Please enjoy.
They say that there isn't a lot of diversity in Madison. There certainly is. It's in this room. And it's true testimony that if you give people what they want, they will come and see it.
All right, and this next program is called Looping Soccer, which is an in-school writing and theater and improv sort of residency. And throughout the 6-week residency, third graders write stories. And this one is untitled by Derek in the 3rd grade. And the story goes, once upon a time, there was a dead bush. It was in a desert. An old man saw it and watered it. The end. And these are professional performing artists performing. And finally, the third program that I'll highlight is Performing Ourselves, which is directed by Kate Corby, the chair of the dance department. This is a clip from their showcase.
Together we explore what it means to be a community and explore
I mentioned in the beginning that I was going to leave you with more questions than answers, and so I will end it there.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start off by reading a little statement. Popular culture is like a shadow being cast by light passing by an object in time and space. It acts as an index as to what the culture in which it came from values, just as shadow as an image is only a distorted representation and silhouette of the object that cast it. Popular culture is a distortion of the culture it came from. It is this silhouette being cast by popular culture that can allow society to see a partial representation of itself, where otherwise it could not. This is why images in popular culture are important. They are a tell. We can see that what we value is also what we fear we might lose. This is especially true in science fiction's eerily accurate predictions of dystopian futures. As an artist, I am making work that is a cultural critique of American culture using the themes brought up by popular culture. I'd just like to start out by thanking Kate Hewson and John Baldacchino for having me back for a second time. I really appreciate it. And my name is Jason Kartez. I'm a third-year grad student in the MFA program. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, comics creator, and writer. And I'm here to talk about my own personal research. In 2016, I received the Horatio Alger Jr. Fellowship for the Study of American Pop Culture at the Rare Books and Special Collections at Founders Memorial Library at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. So just by a show of hands, how many people here know who Horatio Alger Jr. is? So before I got the fellowship, my understanding of Horatio Alger Jr. was limited to Hunter S. Thompson's critique of Alger's American Dream and Hunter S. Thompson's reinterpretation of the American Dream through Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So Horatio Alger is a 19th century American writer. He wrote young adult novels about impoverished boys rise from humble backgrounds, rags to riches story through courage, honesty, and integrity. I'm not really so interested in Horatio Alger, but it is why I got this fellowship. Another thing about Horatio Alger, he was a Unitarian pastor, left the church because of sexual misconduct, and then spent the rest of his life writing youth novels about young boys who were helped out by rich older men. So Founders Memorial Library is this amazing collection of American popular culture. It is there because it's the biggest collection of first edition Horatio Alger Jr. books. More interesting, there's 50,000 dime novels, 100,000 comic books, 1,000 pop-up books, and a lot of one-of-a-kind artist books. So the head librarian, Lynn Thomas, her mission is three things. One, to take dime novels and digitize them. So what a dime novel is that it's inexpensive, serialized popular fiction from 1860 through 1930 that would have been sold for a penny, anywhere up to a dime, which would have made it accessible to like working class. The covers are made from 4-color woodblock relief prints, as well as a process called chromoxylography for the more complicated ones, giving it like a really lush feel. The head librarian, Lynn Thomas, she is a Doctor Who scholar, and she also has written about like alternative narratives in dime novels, one being cross-dressing and gender reversal. So it's just a really great library. One of the privileges I got when I was there is I got to go places that no one else really got to go. I also got like full rummage privileges, meaning I could just pull stuff off the shelf without knowing what I was looking for. So it allowed me to lay out covers like you see in the back and look at everything at once. There's also like lots of ephemera, like swords from Saudi Arabian like kings, lots of comic books, really interesting pop-up books, stacks and stacks of comics. A lot of the stuff is uncatalogued, so it's just like there for the finding, but there's no way to find it unless you rummage, which you can't do unless you're like allowed to. Lots of other weird American culture things. But initially was there because of the Horatio Alger Jr. collection, although that's what wasn't something I wasn't that interested in. So dime novels are typically a lot of like Wild West stories. They kind of shifted to crime stories, and then shifted to entrepreneurial, moralistic, crime-fighting detective stories. This is one of my favorite series, the Deadwood Dick Library, all laid out, and is a series that I made a lot of work for my master's show, my first show here. And it's based on historical characters, Deadwood Dick and Calamity Jane. These are 4-color woodblock relief prints. And then you see the shift to the crime-fighting stories, so Fame and Fortune, Stories of Boys Who Make Money, Stockbroker Dick, Boys Who Make Money, Boys Who Make Money, Stories of Boys Who Make Money, Rough and Ready Dick, Boys Who Make Money, 4 of a Kind. A lot of the dime novel covers have like subtitles, so be like Up Against a Hot Game or 2 College Chums in Wall Street. A whole lot of images are like power images, lots of like police, and then just really lush imagery, like really vivid, even though the paper is like virtually falling apart in your hands. More images of police, lots and lots of images of masking and hidden identity. And then the presence of Gilded Age technology. So this is Edison ticker, which would have been there at the time. And one of the things that happened to me when I was doing this fellowship is it just made me aware of other Gilded Age things. So in Chicago, there was this show With a Wink and a Nod, which was more Gilded Age stuff. And that's where the Edison ticker was from. So this is a piece from my master's show based off of the form of the Edison ticker using CMYK screen print on dimensional glass. It's using imagery, discursive framing, the image of Calamity Jane, Deadwood Dick. So I took that imagery and started to weave it into a contemporary narrative, separating the color separations, making it glitchy, combining it with other imagery. This was right before the presidential elections, so I envisioned Calamity Jane as champion for America against Donald Trump. This is a comic that I wrote. It's available for free download on my website as a PDF if you're interested. Another thing that I started to do was to reimagine, like, what if America valued other things besides work and financial success and the idea that, like, if you are financially successful, you are good. And I just printed out like 50 of these covers on watercolor paper and started to alter what they said. So simultaneously to my research, there was this show with a wink and a nod that is chromolithography covers from a magazine called Puck. It's more like 1930s. Really, really like vivid imagery. And I found this image, which is an apparatus or device to speak discreetly at the opera. And so I went ahead and made it, and my professor, Dr. Faisal Abdu'Allah, and I wore it during the performance in December of 2016, where we had a conversation about politics before Donald Trump was elected in front of a group. And then recently, about 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to show it at the Arts Literature Laboratory, where we re-performed it. And it was only then, with Faisal kind of pointing it out to me during the performance, that I realized that the piece was not necessarily so much about censorship or free speech, but more about how when something is right in front of you and so in your face, there's this phenomena to ignore and pretend like it doesn't exist, because everybody at the opening was, acting like we weren't even there. And I think that that's like problematic, and I think art has the power to highlight that, at the least. So that image came from a curatorial collection from the Flagler Museum in Palm Beach, Florida. So I was in Florida over winter break, and I sought it out. And I was hoping I was going to discover more about the image, see more Gilded Age literature, but I totally struck out. It was just a monument to opulence, a monument to Henry Morrison Flagler. He was one of the co-founders of Standard Oil, made one of the biggest railroads. The biggest railroad in Florida, is responsible for modern Florida. More Gilded Age technology, the Edison phonograph, West Palm Beach, Florida. It's about 10 minutes from Mar-a-Lago. This was during the government shutdown, while Donald Trump was at Mar-a-Lago, so I thought maybe it would be significant. The thing I thought was interesting was just the fact that there's all this riches right next to all this poverty one street over. So this is a piece that is large-scale screen prints that I screen print on plastic, and I put up in the window of the Image Lab in the Discovery Building. So I had permission to put this up, and very shortly after I put it up, the hammer came down and it was censored. It was my attempt to be subversive but not explicit. Looks like I'm missing.
You have to go to presentation view for it.
Is there a second link up there?
There you go.
So this is a maquette.
Oh, let me go out here. It's not showing me. Get it that. There we go.
This is a maquette of the work I'm working on right now. So taking images from the Work and Win series and then making them into cutouts and just to finish it up, making them life-size. So this is a process of digital printmaking using CMYK layers by coloring in between the layer and then painting on them. And then they will be like a theatrical life-size set. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Many folks both inside and outside of our campus have asked me why the Bowles Center cares or is so deeply involved in the study, practice, and support of creative placemaking. And I could say at Wisconsin, we always have been, in one way or another. I would also stress that for me this is personal, having grown up in a town of 800 people and witnessing how the arts changed our lives. For me, the arts may be a lot of things: beauty, creativity, imagination, but my interest and passion for the work has always started with education. With this idea in mind, the beginning of this intersectionality might be to point at the Wisconsin idea, a concept that was first expressed more than a century ago by UW President Charles Van Hise. Author Charles McCarthy coined the phrase the Wisconsin idea in a book of the same name published in 1912. Like Van Hise, McCarthy believed that knowledge and university resources could have a practical influence in addressing societal changes. And I know this isn't an audience that I need to lecture about the Wisconsin idea. Many of you practice and teach with that philosophy in mind every day. But many of you may not be aware of the research and practice of Robert Gard, a legendary cooperative extension service professor at UW-Madison, who used theater and storytelling to bring people together in service to their place. So let's begin by talking about placemaking in Wisconsin for a moment. Many of us in the field believe that Gard and UW Extension may very well be the pioneers of community and creative placemaking. While the term placemaking is decades old and is a term that is used frequently in the world of urban and rural planners, landscape architects, and other city-centered design professionals, community placemaking with the arts at the heart of the change experience is quintessentially Wisconsin. Folks who know Gard's work, which began at UW-Madison in 1945, know that there were two things that put Gard on the map with regard to placemaking: the Wisconsin Idea Theater, which he started almost immediately upon his arrival in the 1940s, and his seminal publication, The Arts in the Small Community, written in 1969, coincidentally, the same year that the Bol Center was founded. Gard and his colleagues in Extension championed the arts at the heart of community development for the following 25 to 30 years and inspired an entire generation of Extension professors in land-grant universities across the country to begin to examine their own places and spaces in creative ways that moved beyond, but was still inclusive, of agriculture and home economy. More recently, the UW Extension Service has talked about community development in myriad ways, but the recent evolution of community vitality and placemaking resonates deeply with how the arts, creativity, and beauty shape our places and spaces in Wisconsin. Now compare this to the more recent national movement and definition of creative placemaking that has infused over $400 million of grant funding to date in the U.S. economy, and those estimates are low when you consider the catalytic spending that occurs after those initial investments. Simply put, creative placemaking captures the myriad ways that artists shape the social, physical, and economic characters of their communities. So how did all of this get captured? In 2010, the National Endowment for the Arts wanted to put an emphasis on building greater support for this type of work. So they did several things, starting with research about where the field of arts and community development was in the country during that time, and naming the field creative placemaking. The idea was to put a policy frame around a set of current activities so that the NEA could research and support the work in an organized way. This coordinated effort focused on a three-pronged investment strategy of support. The first was funding, including the launch of the Our Town program. Our Town funds collaborations between local governments and arts organizations to do projects to improve their communities. The second strategy was new private philanthropy dollars. The former chairman of the NEA, Rocco Landesman, assembled a number of national foundations to create a 10-year funding and research collaborative called Art Place America, which started in 2010 and will sunset in 2020. Finally, the last strategy was to access and promote arts-based practices in other federal agencies. Put another way, Rocco Landesman, a grad of UW-Madison, and who many of you know as a prominent Broadway producer, became chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts in 2009. And as a producer, he immediately understood that the challenge of trying to accomplish anything significant had less to do with the money in hand, of which the endowment had little, and more to do with leveraging investment. Landesman commissioned an NEA white paper on a term that he had coined, creative placemaking, through an NEA program called the Mayor's Institute on City Design, to study the problem and to try to generate potential opportunities. The result was the identification of the federal partner organizations like the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Transportation, which had sizable budgets but struggled to develop programs that would be impactful for communities. The solution became a series of federal partnership programs that created funding partners and grant programs like ArtWorks, Creativity Connects, and the now famous Our Town grants. Ann Markison and Ann Gadwad-Nicodemus at the University of Minnesota at the time, and the authors of the aforementioned white paper on creative placemaking, along with Landesman and his vision for infusing the arts into all sectors of community life and development, help start and shape a conversation that places focus on the arts and artists as a critical additive to the traditional approach of community planning, design, and development. But the real big deal and game changer for the proliferation of creative placemaking projects, there's a lot of P's in there, across the country was the creation of a revolutionary funding consortium called Art Place America. Started by Landesman, Art Place America was started with a specific set of funders, foundations, federal agencies, and financial institutions that committed resources for 10 years in order to try and leverage those big investments into communities through artists and arts-based interventions for change. Jamie Bennett, director of Art Place, may have said it best in a TED Talk he delivered in Hudson, New York in 2014, when he said, "The one asset that all communities have is artists." So where does the Bowles Center figure into this story? The Bowles Center for Arts Administration is at the forefront of re-engaging and reconnecting with the Wisconsin idea. As an MBA program which explores the intersections between the arts, business, and now community development, part of the Bowles Center mission is to train and educate future community leaders who will do their work through an arts and cultural lens. The center is also recognized for convening national conversations, particularly while asking the research question, what is the university's role, past, present, and future, in creative placemaking, practice, teaching, and scholarship? We've approached these questions by studying the past and current stories of our UW history, and then we've looked to other universities, practitioner, and community colleagues across the country. For the present, or at least the last 5 years, the Bowles Center has learned from these stories to help us connect ideas and people that resonate in our Wisconsin places. So in order to link study to practice, we've begun to joining the effort by matching Bowles Center student teams to small and mid-sized rural communities that are interested in exploring the value proposition of the arts and artists in collaboration with other placemaking strategies. In Mineral Point, it was helping a community arts school demonstrate its experiential learning and place in the community. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, it was helping community stakeholders tell the story of a post-manufacturing community struggling to find themselves, not unlike Detroit, since Chrysler was their livelihood and identity for many generations. Bowles students teamed up with the Kenosha Commission on the Arts, UW Extension in Kenosha County, the Kenosha Community Foundation, and others to create awareness and a future plan of action. And as we've mentioned previously, the arts and placemaking in Wisconsin are easily traced back through Extension. Robert Gard's historic tenure and publication of the arts in the small community brought national attention to the value of the arts and community outside of major metropolitan areas. And since that time, the influence of Extension has reached far and wide, through to other land-grant universities, to the Model Arts Extension Service at UMass Amherst, to the Extension Reconsidered initiative delivered through our friends at Imagining America. There are myriad partners in communities, and in particular it is my opinion that colleges and universities should be viewed and used as a resource to all. Our latest consulting projects, which again involve both community and market research, community benchmarking, and analysis of statistical data, have led us to 2 communities this year. The first is in Waunakee. One might call it a first-ring suburb outside of Madison that has been conducting research of their own for the last 5 years around creative economy initiatives, trying to understand how the arts, artists, and other creatives impact social change, physical change, and economic change as a catalyst for growth and vitality. The data collected and research from large data sets like previous studies or readily available demographic and economic information is tested with subsets of the community through surveys, focus groups, and town hall meetings to both create awareness and ideation of what could be possible in their community. The second consulting project we're doing this year may not seem like placemaking at first blush. Second year's MBA students in the Bowles Center are working with the staff and volunteers of the Chazen Museum of Art on our own campus and community to better understand the motivations, or lack thereof, for visiting the museum. Behavioral patterns and norms become a huge component of understanding why people visit or utilize any space or place. In the case of the Chazen, how many of you have ever been inside? Why did you go? Was it for a class? Did a friend or family member introduce you? Or did you just wander in of your own accord because the place looked interesting or inviting? How and why people use space is just as important as the physical, social, and economic attributes of a place. Other UW initiatives include the University Year Project, or University Alliance as it's known, a campus-wide effort among several UW-Madison campus units to activate students and faculty through research, exploration, and implementation of strategies to help our local and regional communities create more vibrant, livable cities. And the Bullsetters teamed up with many of these same campus units to create the UW Creative Placemaking Consortium, a community of learning and practice that has in its first year organized collaborative learning workshops, learned about initiatives each other was doing. We even wrote a Mayor's Institute of City Design grant together. So that's what we've been up to. But as we look to the future, we teamed up with Blackbaud Corporation, or company rather, the maker of Razor's Edge fundraising software, and A2RU, the Alliance for Arts and Research Universities, to create and launch The Hub, a social media resource collaboratory, the term that we borrowed from you all, developed and managed by students at the Bowles Center. For us, this project was also about education, in service to our university partners to help link up all these amazing stories, toolkits, and case studies to help other universities be in better service to their communities, and to share the examples of schools that are already embracing the study and practice of creative placemaking. And currently, we're trying to find ways to expose my students to the ideas of creative placemaking by building and launching a summer course that will be open to all who are interested both on campus and in our external communities. So I messed up my slides, but there's that one. Okay. While the Summer Institute isn't set up as yet, it's something that we're looking to do this summer, along with our colleagues at the Collaboratory, to really just expose more students and more folks in the community to the art of creative placemaking. So how can you be of service to your communities? I've put a few resources that you can check out, websites, upcoming symposia, and consortium meetings. The Wisconsin Idea says that it's about learning and being accessible to everyone. And at the Bowles Center, I see the arts and artists being at the center of that philosophy. Thank you.
I am Sarah Marty. I'm an affiliate of the Arts Institute and a program director for the Early Music Festival. And I'm also on the faculty at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, running their arts management program. My colleague Joshua Calhoun is not available today. It's a heavy teaching day for him, but I'm here to represent both of us as co-directors of Holding History. And before I dive in, I thought it might be a good idea just to get a little bit of background on who we are before I talk about what we do and why it matters. So we started in July of 2015, initially with a cohort of about 10 students. And it's an interesting interdisciplinary mix. Calhoun's background is in book history, Renaissance poetry, and environmental humanities. My background is in arts business, music, and theater. On the surface, seems like we might be in quite disparate fields, but we have a shared love of Shakespeare, which brought us together. We were part of the Shakespeare and Community MOOC through continuing studies back in 2015. So I'm hoping as we go through the presentation, you'll see how there's a lot of interdisciplinarity between fields that initially on the surface may seem completely unconnected. So the work that we do in Holding History is looking at how we capture ideas, how you hold them in your hand, and how you can share them with others. And bringing together our multiple disciplines, we start with the book history and the archives as how the ideas are captured. And we work through tools from theater and the arts to think about how those objects were created and made, and how you can share your knowledge and your research and involve others in the conversation. As you're watching these slides today, my colleague Calhoun is a keynote monster. And you'll see that they're visually beautiful, that we worked with photographers to create and collect beautiful images of the work that is done, and how that helps with telling the story of the research done by our students who are in the cohorts each year. So how many folks in the room had a chance to see the First Folio at the Chazen Museum in 2016? What was that experience like? Anybody? Where was it housed? Where was the First Folio housed? In a museum. So it was in a museum. Was it
In a case.
in a case? What was the room like?
Narrow.
A narrow room. As you can see, it's sort of dim lighting. And where is the book located? In a box, underneath glass. You can't see it, but off to the side there's a very stern-looking security guard. Right?
Open to only one page.
Open to only one page. The to be or not to be speech from Hamlet. Now, this was an amazing opportunity for University of Wisconsin-Madison to have a First Folio on campus and to be part of this national tour of the book that gave us Shakespeare. And it really was a wonderful opportunity. They did a beautiful job with the exhibit and all the materials around it. But it was the experience that you expect when you go to the archives, that the books are rare, that you are not to touch them, that they are removed, that they are distant. It's much like watching a theatrical production on TV versus being in the theater near the actors and having that human connection. So what we do in Special Collections through the Holding History program is we go beyond the glass. It's not there. We're trying to break the barriers. We're trying to make the collection seem that it's an accessible resource for people on campus and in the community. And we do this by thinking not only of a stewardship of materials, but also a stewardship of knowledge. Students are initially very apprehensive. Are you sure? I don't want to get in trouble. I don't know. I don't have any background in this. I'm really scared, right? And we think of it as, you know, it's okay to not have all the answers. Be curious and ask questions. You know more than you think. What can we discover, and how can you share what you discovered with others? So we do this through a process of making and of mentorship. So that First Folio, it's kind of an amazing work of art that relied on many people using their hands to create all of the pieces. 900 pages of handmade paper that was made from rags that were collected and ripped up and shredded and pulped and fermented into sheets of paper, pulled by hand, many of which were probably ruined in the process. So who knows how many. There were 250 copies, so 900 pages times 250 copies of man-made paper. There were a team of 5 compositors who individually set every single letter for every single page. Took them 2 years to do all of that. Kind of incredible when you think about it. There were people who created the wood and the leather that became the bindings. No 2 copies are the same because every single one was done by the human hand. And the artistry and the craft that goes into that is pretty astonishing. And part of what we do is to work with our students on understanding the making so they can better understand the object itself. So part 1 of making is paper making with Robert Faisal at Edgewood College. He's an amazing artist and a fabulous teacher. And each time we have a new cohort, they do a paper making workshop. They get messy, they get wet. There's a squeegee for the floor. And this is an opportunity for them to gain a greater appreciation for the books they're going to be working with in the archives. Today, paper is disposable. Many people don't recycle it. They don't think about where it comes from because we're so removed from the natural resources. Somebody cuts a tree down somewhere, we never see it. It goes into some mechanized factory, and we don't really think about it as a natural substance, and that it had a life, and it was organic before it came to us. And in this way, we're bridging that gap. The students see the rags, they see the different stages of the pulping before they get a chance to then make the paper. They hang it to dry, and a few weeks later, they get those sheets back. It's a completely different experience. The next step is working with the Center for the History of Print and Digital Culture and the iSchool, formerly SLIS, School of Library and Information Studies, in the Text Technologies Lab. Now imagine being a student and the only thing you've ever known is a computer with this amazing delete key. Occasionally your teachers will make you take notes by hand with a pen or a pencil, but the word is a much more ephemeral thing with a computer. Now give that student a typewriter. What happens? Well, the key's pushed down and it's like harder to make a word. Oh my gosh, I made a mistake. Where's the delete? There isn't a delete key. What am I going to do? Now, take those keys out of the typewriter and break off the letter on the end and put them in a tray. A's and B's and C's and D's. And there's uppercase and there's lowercase. And then you have a little tiny piece of metal and you have to line them up one at a time to make a word. Now you're doing 900 pages of Shakespeare with 4 other colleagues. And you better not screw it up because this is a really expensive project. It gives you a different understanding. As you can see, we had a tough day our first day in Text Technologies Lab. We were trying to set the words holding history. It's kind of there if you hold it up to the mirror, I guess. We ended up with it backwards. It's kind of like Ginger Rogers, you know, with heels backwards. Didn't quite work, but this again gives them a very different hands-on activity and experience of what it took to create books at that time. It's very different than today and thinking of modern technology. We also had the great honor to be part of a Book DNA project, international project, being spearheaded by Matthew Collins, who's in zooarchaeology at York University. Calhoun is part of an international team of scholars who've been meeting at least once a year, thinking about what we can tell if we can identify the animal species in the vellum or the animal skin in manuscripts and early books. So before books were made with paper, they were made from vellum. And they're now taking protein samples, these are from 13th century manor rolls and special collections, and they can identify, was it a goat? Was it a cow? Was it a sheep? Was it a horse? And they've also been able to identify certain makers based on the way that they collated. Some people like to use cows on the outside pages and goats on the inside pages. Or they might use cows for the chapter pages and sheep in between. And then if they can determine the protein kind, they can look at what geographic location it may have been published in, and they're able to start to trace where the book might have come from, which is a really interesting way to look at the provenance in the background. Also looking at what was captured. What do we have left in the archive of the record? We know that what we have is a very small sample, but we can still learn from that. Here we have 2 undergraduate students who are taking the samples. They're contributing to an international archive. This is part of the work that they're doing as students on campus. And the last part of hands-on training is the special collections. Anybody remember what these are? Right? So part of information literacy is understanding that there are many different ways to learn, and that each of them has a different outcome. The card catalog by hand is different than the card catalog online. The things that you find and locate are different with each of those tools. One does not replace the other. E-readers did not replace print books. Right? Synthesizers did not replace regular pianos. So it's and. It's a yes and as opposed to or making it go away. Part of this is care and feeding of whole books. How do I hold it? How do I turn the pages? How do I check out the book appropriately? What tools can I use to investigate the things I can learn from the pages, both in the words and everything else that's there, the doodles and the margins. What can I tell from the way that it's bound? What about the illustrations? And how do I go about doing that in a way that's respectful of the resources? And how do I take what I'm learning, collect that information, and use it later on? If that makes sense. A lot of it is really a process of discovery. And going back to the card catalog, one of the really amazing things about teaching students how to use this tool is when you use a card catalog, you have that serendipity of what's next to the thing I'm looking for in the catalog. And sometimes some of the most amazing projects our students have done have been, I went in to find this, and then I was going through the cards and I found this. This is unbelievable. We had a student last semester, Rosie Brzezinski, who stumbled upon travel journals from 1890 from a young man from London who was sent by the telegraph company to Nigeria to help install telegraph lines, which were there because of colonization and the desire for English companies to capitalize on the natural resources in Africa at the time. So her research project took a completely different turn because she was just looking for travel journals. I don't know what I'm going to find. All by flipping through the cards. Process of discovery. So all of this research, all of this work, all of these hours in the library, all the hands-on workshops, makerspaces, culminate in a keynote event. The side piece of this is, in addition to all of this research, it's also how do you tell this story? How do you put together an engaging PowerPoint presentation? What should you wear if you're going to be doing a public presentation? What should your resume look like? How do you write a good bio? How do you talk to somebody one-on-one versus talking to a whole group? And that whole side curriculum is something that we also are able to offer the mentors each year, in addition to connecting them with amazing scholars in the field. Ann Strange-Shamps from Wisconsin Public Radio, Charles Monroe Kane from Wisconsin Public Radio, folks from Wisconsin Public Television. So they're getting a broader understanding of how to be a scholar, how to work in the public humanities, and also how to be an artist. So at our keynote events, we bring in public audiences from campus and community, usually about 50 people, because that's all we can fit in the room. We always invite folks from Madison Senior Center and from Capitol Lakes. We've had students from Young Shakespeare Players. We're able to work with the Odyssey Project. And each of the students has a table with the books they've been working on, and folks are able to just self-select, go through the room almost like a science fair. And the students talk about what they learned. And often, the folks who come in have never been in special collections before. They're, again, terrified. Are you sure I can touch this page? Where are the gloves? I didn't get any gloves. I don't have any gloves. I can't come into this room, right? And it becomes a process of not only sharing what they've learned, but inviting others to be curious, inviting others to ask questions, discovering things together about the objects that are there, and having a conversation as a community. So there's so much that can happen in those keynote events. We do about one event a year. I think I'm just about out of time, but I guess I'll wrap up with our website, which has lots of information, holdinghistory.org, and if you have any questions, would love to talk to anybody about the program in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for sharing your really fascinating work. It's so diverse and it's always stimulating to hear like one after another. It's like a little mini conference. But anyway, I wanted to open up to those of us who've been listening and enjoying. And any thoughts, any connections, any questions?
I have a practical question for you, Sarah.
Sure.
Which is just to say, is that class offered at UW-Madison or Whitewater or both or continuing studies where
it would be helpful for me to provide a location, huh? We are at University of Wisconsin-Madison and we work with University of Wisconsin-Madison Special Collections, and it's actually not a class. It's a volunteer extracurricular group that students can apply to be part of, and we work with a cohort of 10 students each year. So this spring we'll be recruiting for folks to start with a soft beginning in the summer and then a full kickoff in the fall.
Can non-students apply?
Maybe you'd like to be a faculty mentor. Yes, for sure, if you'd be interested. Yes, definitely.
What an amazing project.
Thank you. It's been a really wonderful collaboration, and our colleagues on campus have been incredibly generous to allow us to have access to the space and to the collections.
So to go off that though,
yeah,
and for everybody else too though, Sarah, when do you sleep?
On the
We're all in the arts, we don't sleep.
Exactly, on the drive sidewalk.
Yep. I have a question for Community Arts Collaboratory. So I'm wondering how the three programs kind of interact, if they do at all. Are there synergies between them? Do you see them? I know you said there's going to be an integrated summer school, and perhaps that's the answer of that's where they're going to interact. I don't know.
Well, the Arts Collab was formed in September.
Yeah.
So pretty new. I've been around since the end of September and trying to figure out what each program has been doing. So we meet, we try to meet twice a month.
Mm-hmm.
We've been, I think, in the same room all at the same time, maybe once. And part of my role right now, thanks to Grand Challenges funding, is to start to do some observation to understand our evaluation practices and do some shared evaluation. So I'm sort of the unifying thread, aside from these gatherings where we brainstorm and think about what we can do together and better and bigger. And so yeah, that's sort of a quick summary.
And what's the summer program? What age group is that for?
So it's pending funding,
Mm-hmm.
but we decided yesterday we're for sure going to do at least a 1-week pilot, regardless of what resources are available. Yeah. So most likely we'll be piloting a 1-week program in elementary and high school, likely in McFarland or Middleton, to explore how. See, Faisal, do you want to give an example of what we're going to try to do in high school?
Yeah, I think for me in the very beginning, it's as if we all had something in common as practitioners. And we had a kind of philosophy about how we looked at communities and how important art and culture is in their lives. So we do it from kind of different points, but we work towards the same center. So one of my plans is, we had a discussion yesterday and I said, we're all going to somehow explore 3 themes, same theme in all of our kind of workshops. And for me, Fairhouse is all about thinking, making, and dissemination. And I work with these young kids who have had problems with the youth justice system, who I feel have been ignored by the Wisconsin idea. So I try to kind of build a certain amount of kind of self-knowledge. I try to make them look at issues around representation. I try to make them look at issues around language and text. And also just simply how that information is then disseminated, how they can have a much more discerning eye, critical eye. So that's what I hope to do over the summer, is do a very short project that first looks at the materials that they're thinking about. That's why I ask those questions about, you know, name me some states, or just name me, you know, anything, because I'm curious about what's in people's heads. And when you share that, people are thinking, oh, is that what's in your head? And that stuff that's in your head then becomes the center of what we can pull from to then make something. So we're already connected to it. And then after that, we think about how do we put this out there? And think, well, how can I do that? Well, I say you're already doing it by using Twitter and Facebook. You're already putting stuff out there. So let's work out a kind of a pathway. So in some ways, that's what I'm kind of loosely going to be thinking about, and I've always thought about. And I think all of the other groups are kind of doing the same thing, but letting them see how important, you know, culture is and how the artists have been the shapers of the world that we live in. You know, we're the most important people on the planet.
Jason, I would like to hear a little bit more about your adventuring in the archives, and just how did you organize yourself once you got there in terms of, you know, if it's just a wide open pile of stuff to rummage through, how did you navigate that? And then afterwards, as you were finding things, how were you then recording it for yourself, for use, you know, as an artist? Just would love to hear about some process stuff around that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't totally wide open. Like, some stuff has been cataloged in those like back stacks. There's just so much stuff that not all of it has been cataloged. I think I spent about 8-hour days there, so I treated it like 8 hours of continuous work. It was really hot outside, and it was climate controlled inside, so that helped. Let's see what else. I took a lot of pictures. They had giant like walk-in scanners, and they had like a digitization center. So there was like one employee of the university whose job, like I wasn't allowed to scan them because they're so fragile. They're like cradle scanners. So I would just like earmark stuff and be like, I want everything from here. And then they would do it. And it was like, also the first time I was treated like super, super, super well, to the point where I was like in disbelief. Because it was just like this thing that people come and do. I think that there has been an essay about surviving the zombie apocalypse written by someone who works at that library in that special collection, because it's set up to be very like removed from like being out. Like once you're in, it's very hard to get out, and then to go in, you have to go through like a lot of like security and stuff. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can't just walk in and out continually. So it's kind of like you're going into like this inner area of discovery, which I think is one of the really interesting things when it's like taking stuff that's print that's starting to like fall apart and trying to like save that by digitizing it, where at the same time artists are trying to take everything that's like digital, social media, and trying to put it back and like make it tangible again.
Well, there's an interesting conversation. A lot of libraries and a lot of museums and a lot of archives are digitizing and then destroying. And the digital object is different than the physical object. I'm really happy the Folger Shakespeare Library has Folger text online that people can read pages and transcriptions of original printings and early printings of Shakespeare's work, but there's nothing that compares to being able at special collections here on campus to hold that second printing of the folio from the 1600s and to smell the pages and to touch the paper. That's not the same as flipping through the pages. Just like if you read a book with a Kindle, it's different than if you have the hardcover book in your hands. And that's a real conversation we see in information management and in the archives and in libraries, is this idea that one replaces the other. Just like computers didn't replace paper. 100%. It's not a replacement model, it's always a yes and then it's a conversation that's continuing in terms of the idea of stewardship of knowledge and stewardship of objects and cultural history that is really important. And unfortunately, right now, that conversation isn't far enough along, and we've lost thousands and thousands and thousands of objects that tell the story of who we are and where we've come from and what we've done and what was valued, what was captured, why, and those items are gone. And now they're off in some cloud as a file that was scanned before resolutions were even half what they are now, and that's all we have left is that remaining little piece. So I think it's fascinating to think about what that means for all of us as teachers and community members.
Jason, I think your remark about being treated really, really well is interesting in terms of thinking about ourselves as arts scholars, right? It's something we're not used to, like, whoa, somebody's taking me seriously. They're letting me into, they're taking my curiosity about this material seriously and allowing me to interact with it in a serious way as a scholar. So I guess I don't even have a question in that, but I just thought that I identified with that statement. And I guess it means maybe that as artists, we don't always have the language, the way of explaining that maybe gets us that kind of access to places. And that could be something that a group like this, when we're talking about arts research, is how to bridge those gaps in communication so that we can make clear, oh, why do I belong here? Why should I be granted access? Somehow you did it, so well done.
Well, to comment after that, so it wasn't like a fellowship that an artist had ever gotten before. You know, it's for like English PhDs or English whoever who, I had like, there was one other person who also got it at the same time, and he was like researching everything done by this one publisher, and it was very like mathematical how he was doing it. So it was also the first research thing where I felt like I had to discover something, but I mean, it was kind of just like what was already there.
But I think what you're saying is interesting in terms of the challenge of arts research. And my fear has always been, I remember getting into a job at an art school, and I came in with the notion of arts research in mind, and the colleagues who were at the center and known to do arts research, they were immediately, when I saw them, because I work in education as well, this is a social scientific method, not an arts research. And that immediately put me like this with them. I mean, I don't want to go into it, but I mean, if you look at arts, what's called arts research these days, there are various kind of components. It's almost like a kind of, it's like any college with different species. But one of the things which I find problematic, and I don't find problematic because I'm against it, because I mean it fulfills certain needs, is that we all too quickly, some of the colleagues borrow other methodologies which are already established because they're like keys to get you in. But once you're in, then they expect you to do what those other methodologies are doing, and then you start doing different things, and people start getting really worried about you. So I think the challenge we're living in at the moment, and this is why we're into A2RU and things like that, is that there is a lot of discussion about, now I'm not saying we should standardize the language, but definitely, for example, if you go into art school and you work in art school, you know that there is a lot of stuff happening, especially during the crits, where actually a certain language has been developed, and there are certain things that you talk about documentation and all that kind of thing. But it's only people within themselves who talk that language, and no one else understands it. So it's how on earth can you take that? And some people don't even want to take it out because they just feel uncomfortable. So there is a reluctance on both sides of sharing this kind of language, this approach. So I think what Jason did actually was quite heroic in a way, that he went in there with his own kind of idea and take it over. And they were very generous in giving him that space. But I mean, we need more of that, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing these Agons, because actually we want to kind of just look at what the sheer making of it, which gives the language. But it is very difficult. It's a bit challenge in terms of how on earth we develop that. It's a bit like I don't know whether you watched Genius when Einstein, the whole thing about when he was talking about certain things in relativity, he had to relate to certain things which were always there. But on the other hand, the new stuff, which appeared to came out of nowhere, people couldn't get it. But he had to kind of get them to get it, because he said, no, actually, you can't use the old language in order to do this, because this is a totally different thing. And I think that's the big challenge, and that's also the beauty of it. And I personally find with working with students and colleagues is that it's how do you dig this out from the practice. For example, you were talking about the monotype stuff. My father grew up as doing that. That was since he was the age of 15. Like he didn't even finish high school. And I remember him telling me how he used to do it. And apparently, we still have them in his garage actually. Now he's passed away, but I mean they're there. Big things with monotypes, because he saved them. They were going to be thrown away from his typography. He worked with the government, and he said, "No, I'll take them." So I have all these sets, and he was one of these people who will tell you exactly what the font is and how. And I remember when I told him about, you know, Pika as well, and I was telling him how word processing operates. No, but that's the same stuff we use when we use them. But he knows what a double space looks like and feels like, because it's a line of a certain thing, and you can hold it like that, and it has that kind of tactility. And I know that in these days, in schools, art schools are starting to buy these things back, because they want their design students, especially in typography, to know exactly what this feels like. It's a bit like, you know, people say that one day we will go to a place where we see a tree, because we've seen all the trees on paper, and in photographs we don't have any trees anymore, so you just go and see one. Oh, I heard you have a tree, can I have a look at it? Because I've never seen one in real life, and don't touch it. And it's the same thing with typography, but I think it's really important, and that's the kind of language which we're losing. We don't have that language which is tactile, which is we can kind of, you know, really touch and make. And it's difficult how to teach it. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you're...
Well, and, listening to you talk about the importance and primacy of the object is the whole point of a museum, and the availability and the access of objects, and how do we make, so the challenge now, I think, is this interdisciplinarity and this mining the museum. I'm thinking of, while you were talking, I was thinking of Fred Wilson and, you know, how he went in, and it was quite, you know, I don't know how well he was treated. I hope he was treated well, but I think there's always a moment of intersection and kind of fear from the museum kind of steward position to someone who comes in with a very different set of expectations and curiosities. And so our challenge on both sides is how do we narrow that gap, and how do we create a creative space? And so that's the wonderful opportunities that we have being on a university campus, and how do we really make our collections safely and interestingly accessible, and we both end up learning so much. And those of us who are working in the collections, I think it's so satisfying and so important for our purpose, is helping students through that process of questioning and finding out, you know, what is the question, and how is this made, and then where does that lead you, and, you know, and for us, you know, we may have a whole, you know, baggage of studies and, you know, certain methodologies at our shoulders, but our challenge is to destabilize that, is to actually ask those questions ourselves and be part of that discovery process. And how do we engage by how we display objects, by what kind of information we're transmitting, the technologies possibly, all of these strategies. So it's an exciting time.
I would add that Jason's been a great partner for the Arts Enterprise classes, and we've had a couple of semesters we've actually been able to take our entire class. So this fall I had 45 students, and we broke into 3 groups of 15, and we were able to get tours and be in the basement in this super secret storage where all the art is hanging on grids, and there are boxes with Fragile on them and crowbars, and it was really a different way of thinking about what a museum was and what access was. We were able to see the print room, and then also got a chance to visit the Korshak collection and get a tour from a docent on campus. And it's been really wonderful for those students who maybe had not been in the building at all to not just only come and see what's on the walls, but to see a little bit about how it got there, and to also learn about all of the people that are working behind the scenes that they might not realize are part of creating that space and creating that opportunity and experience. So thank you for that.
Yeah, the other thing I'm noticing is the thread through all this about access is we often think of access as for people who are disenfranchised or who, you know, don't normally have it. But I think access also works from the point of view of people who have it but don't know they do, which is often more often the case than not. So, I mean, going back to the Chazen and what a great partner they've been on campus, you know, the business school also was able to take our first year MBA students over there this year, not just the 5 Bull Center students, but the entire class of 100 through the museum. And the first sort of reaction was, you know, I feel like, you know, they didn't know what to do. I mean, they weren't quite sure how they should behave. And, you know, Angela worked with the curator of education there to come up with, you know, a way for them to walk through that space and a way for them to feel like it was something that they, you know, could access and it's something that they wanted to enjoy. And then they all walked out with a membership to the museum because, you know, even though we all probably know that the museum is free, it's amazing how many people in the survey that we did for the study that we're doing with the Chazen listed as one of their barriers to entry as it was too expensive.
Yeah, and I think you raised a really good point, is that when I teach a Faisal project in the UK, for example, and I tell the young people, this is your museum as well. You know, your tax, or you know, or your parents' tax pays towards it. And I tell the young kids here as well. This is not about spaces where you're not allowed, these are spaces where you should be going into because you have an investment in this space. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. You've already paid towards it. So go in and enjoy it, and if there are things that you don't see, you can always make a request. And keep making the request, and just keep doing it. So it's about how they look at that threshold. And I think it's about how we use the language, by letting them know that, yeah, this is very much a space that is for you as well.
Could you share more about your project? Because you guys didn't have very much time to cover everything, but...
My project?
Is it Full House?
Yeah, Full House. I started when I came here as a visiting artist.
Okay.
And the F was for Faisal and the H was for Henry. And and the class that I was taught was a class that was teaching students that were here art through the senses.
Okay.
So we were using taste, we were teaching body memory, we were thinking about, you know, vision, you know, all the kind of senses of how you can make things. And over that period of the semester, we brought in specialist individuals who would teach students. Like Patrick Sims, before he was a provost, he came and did an amazing class in theatre on body memory, you know.
Oh, wow.
And then we had Henry Jewell's wife came in and did a class on taste memory. And Chris Walker did an amazing class on movement and body memory. So it was a way in which students were able to understand the kind of totality of their existence through these different forms of the senses. And it's something that I just continued to just, you know, be kind of involved in and using the same formula and working with these kids that I found out who were in the youth justice system, who were in a space that says that education is going to go beyond this place to help everyone, but it wasn't helping them. So I saw Faisal as having a kind of a purpose of reaching out and just maybe giving them some kind of way to open up, because they come into that space in the first week and they give you the death stare. I'm telling you, these are like 11 young people, it's a split group, you know, and they just give you the death stare because they're coming from spaces and homes that, and one of the principles is that we have food to start the class, that we sit around the table and we eat and we talk, and we have healthy foods, and we speak to them about the kind of foods they should be eating, because that's probably one of the first things you need to be conscious of, because there's this whole thing about food, and they don't understand that some communities don't have the resources to eat 5 fruits a day. They're lucky if they can get 1. So we try to give them, you know, strategies on how to eat on a budget, and we tell them the importance of just eating. And when we're eating, we talk about what we went through in the week, and we laugh about stuff, and then we get into the core of the project. And then we just take them through a series of processes. We get performance things involved, we get written elements involved, they work with photography. I take them up to screen printing, they do a project in print. And that's when it really opens up their eyes. Because it's something that they really understand, saying, well, my t-shirt, is that a screen print? I said, yeah. And they think about all the things they have in their homes that were made in that way, constructed in that way. So their understanding of the world begins to change. Then I talk about representation in magazines and not being the author of that content, that other people are writing things about you that then the wider society then makes an impression and makes a judgment on you. But if you start to be in control of that content, then somehow you can begin to show different forms of, you know, who you are and you know, and begin to be critical. And I think you cannot be critical about something without a framework. So I said, you must have a reference point to say, well, this is what I see as a really interesting point of, you know, to insert myself into a conversation, and then have an opinion and have your voice heard. And you know, before they come into the class, they just don't know. All they care about is Twitter and just trying to survive. And to make fun part of their life. So they can come in and I want them to laugh. I want them to realize that life is pretty good. And having health, waking up in the morning, is actually a blessing, which means you can actually make some kind of impact and have an appetite for life. So Faisal is It's also about wellness as well. So,
Thank you for sharing that.
no.
Nice to hear that.
Jason, may I ask you something? Did I hear you right or wrong when you said you were censored for those things you put on the window?
Yes, I was.
Why was it? Did I miss anything there? Or what were you censored for? I mean,
Yeah, who sends you here?
Do you want me to read the email?
what
Um,
was wrong with them? I mean, or according to these people, or what?
So,
They were holding guns, weren't they?
yeah.
There was a gun.
So there's an image from one of those covers, I think it's out there somewhere, of a person holding a gun. And all I did was like make that green thing and screen printed on
Yeah.
top. And it was just from someone basically saying that some questions have been raised as to their appropriateness. I'm all for the creative process and provocative art, but I do agree that this isn't the right venue for these particular pieces. Do you know when these are planning to come down? I'm wondering if we need to accelerate that process or somehow modify the pieces, although the artist may well prefer to just take them down in that case.
So in this place, in this country, you can carry a gun, you can shoot people, but you can't depict it.
Put a picture.
So
Yeah.
which I find bizarre.
I mean, so that piece was made out of a reaction to Wisconsin gun laws.
Yeah.
And to them being more lax. And
You couldn't invoke some
He didn't have a
amendment.
permit for his art, John, that was the problem.
No, but I was
He didn't have the
thinking-
appropriate, no, I'm being facetious, I'm not being serious, I'm being
No, but I was thinking, I mean, couldn't there be
ridiculous.
some amendment somewhere that you can kind of, which one is it, first, second, third?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, freedom of depiction. It's kind of bizarre about it because I can't really get it.
I mean, that's one of the points I'm trying to make, is that when something is like right there in front of you, and you have to see it, I mean, and you have to react to it, but you don't want to, then you have to take it down. That's
Yeah.
really trying to highlight that.
In a way, that's what I meant by schooled art. That, I mean, it is formed and creativity, as long as it's benign, according to whatever they think, then it's okay. But I mean, once they start sort of, if it threatens that kind of benignity, then we're into trouble here. And that's what worries me a lot, because, you know, for me, that was a really good example of unlearning, because when they see something like that, they really kind of, you know, confused about the whole thing, and they need to kind of really think about it. So there's nothing nice about it, there's nothing good about it, which is fantastic, because that's where the good is in terms of how it challenges you. So in fact, it was censored, but just beyond belief.
I mean, that's one of my main issues here. And it happened when I first came in my first year. We had a student had a piece on the top floor, and that he was told to take it down. It was a silhouette of a naked person. And there's been other issues. But I teach within the class, and I try to tell people that if we keep teaching our students this idea about what they should and shouldn't look at, we're teaching them to fail. Because these students will go and will be in a room or be in an exhibition with students from RISD, from Yale, whose perception of censorship is completely different. So we're sending in our students who may have the eyes and the brain of a 14-year-old against another student who has the eyes and brains of someone that's lived 5 times. And they'll get squashed. So I think we are underrepresenting our students, and we're not teaching them, you know, some element of what life is like. And I would hope that somebody higher up in the chain, in the arts, can be the person that walks in with a bat when the hill starts to talk their nonsense, because it keeps happening. And, you know, I'm going to keep pushing against it. And Jason called me and said, Faisal, what do I do? And I was like, keep it up. You know? But he said, it's Linda Barry's space. And I thought, okay, she's a colleague. Yeah, okay, I would agree, take it down. However, you know, this is something that is really, you know, it's something that's really, I have a real issue with it.
I have a problem with it because, I mean, I'm like you, I come from, you know, background, especially in Britain, where we push them to do the most sort of strange stuff, almost obscene, whatever it is.
Absolutely,
you can imagine.
obscene.
And actually, if it becomes too benignly sort of obscene, then you challenge it, so to speak. So I really don't get this, because how on earth can you push risk? How on earth can you...
But I think this group here has enough leverage, and I think they're all very bright individuals, and I think we have the capacity to, you know, kind of come together if this ever happens again. I think.
One of the examples that comes to mind is Erica Halverson, who runs Whoop and Soccer, told a story about the first day in a residency in a 3rd grade classroom. And one of the kids, they get to write stories, that's what they do. And one of the kids, they decided the story was going to be about a booger town that lived in a nose. There were all these boogers in the nose, and the teacher was mortified. She's like, this is already pushing boundaries. If they're going to talk about boogers, then the next thing you know, they'll be talking about farts and who knows what, and it's all
That's all they talk about at that age.
What do you mean that age?
And so,
Elementary school.
and so Erica said, no, we're going to treat all the content as content. These are stories, and if we don't react in a way that gives them a reaction, then they'll just continue to write stories about whatever comes to mind. And it was just a lesson in providing this tool to the classroom educator to not censor the kids and squelch their imagination.
Exactly.
And just to treat content as content. And so, yes, earlier this week I was in a 3rd grade classroom at Emerson where they were writing arguments. They got to argue for whatever they thought should be different in the town of Whoop and Soccer. And they decided that people should shower in pudding. And they came up with all these arguments about why the people of Whoop and Soccer should shower in pudding. And that was their content, that was their story.
But I think the thing that happened at the Discovery Building is also tied into money, donors, right? That's something that we don't really ever talk much about on campus, but right, what scares the person who's managing the building is that it's going to offend the big donor who paid for the building. Therefore, I got to head this off at the pass because what if they cut off our funding? And you know,
But I think for me, one of my counter arguments, and that I agree, I say to them, but you're a donor, and 7 times out of 10, that donor is either an arms dealer or an all-fracker. Their money's not clean. So I would tell them, yes, I would agree, we need to protect the sanctity of your donors. However, you also need to understand that how your donor accrues that amount of money, it's not ethical. So let's have that conversation as well. And I'm happy to have that conversation in the open, and if the work comes down, fine, but I'm letting them know that I'm the gadfly. I'm going to be the fly in the ointment. I'm going to be the one that's always going to try and piss them off, because I think it's really important that we can be as open and as clear as possible with each other. And I don't think they are. It's too, it's too much cloak and dagger.
Yeah. Just to respond to that, I mean, that's exactly what it was. That piece was, me trying to be subversive without being really explicit. I put that piece up without putting any tape on the windows, which is something that they really care about a lot.
I know.
But I think one of the challenges in Madison is there's art that needs to be seen by people who don't necessarily want to see it. And so you can't just go out and do graffiti in Madison because it's too small of a place, or do street art. So you have to come up with other ways to be subversive with permission, which is a challenge.
You have to be told how to be free. Yeah. So learning is good.
Sherry, I don't know if you maybe mentioned this in passing, but do you want to talk a bit more about the Arts Business Research Symposium that's coming up?
Yeah, thank you, that'd be great. So about 6 years ago when I got here, one of the things that the business school wanted to do, and probably the main reason that I wanted to come here, was because they noticed that they had all of these business and entrepreneurship classes that they were basically, there was a gateway. No one else could come in unless you were a business school student. And they recognized the importance of allowing access, and they wanted someone to share with the rest of the campus that access was there and available, particularly for artists if they were interested in business curriculum as a way to think about how to make a living and a life with their work. So these arts enterprise classes were started. Sarah teaches one of those right now. John Surdick, another affiliate, teaches another one. And the other piece of all of that was how do we share every other year, which is what it turns out to be, a way for people to come together and just talk about, kind of almost like what we're doing here, but in a little bit more structured environment. So the Arts Business Research Symposium was created, and the first year we did it, it was all about the of life. So it was collaboration, it was co-working spaces, it was co-funding, and we would just, most of it wasn't talking heads. It was, we put the idea out there for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you spend the next hour and a half with a group at a table figuring out what that looks like in your space or in your particular area of the world. 2 years ago, we started with the question of what is the future of creative placemaking in higher education, because what I was noticing is there's all this amazing work coming out of the university, in our community. I mean, even set aside the Robert Gard stuff for a moment, it's just, there's all this fantastic activity, but nobody, it's not coordinated, and nobody knows that the other is doing it, right? So if there was a way to bring everybody together so that we could start to work together, and you know, I learned about what Faisal's doing, and he learns what we're doing, and all of a sudden you've got a project that's even bigger and richer, and isn't about you foisting something onto the community, but rather it's in response to the community saying, hey, over here, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, or I'd like you to come in and help me do that. So, so that's April 19th through the 21st. It's really cheap. So any faculty members or students, it's $50 to participate. And it's really just going to be a lot of people coming in and talking about their stories, and then we're encouraging people to come in teams. So not just by yourself, but with other people that you work with or that you want to work with, so you can spend a lot of that time thinking about, okay, how do I move this idea forward? And what are the resources that are out there that maybe I don't know about that would allow me to move that work forward? So, yeah, Thursday night I think we've got Art Space, which is a nonprofit real estate developer in Minneapolis that's been doing a lot of work around the country talking about a new process that they've called Art Space Immersion, where they go into communities and they work with community groups and artists to think about, and it's specific about artists being in those community groups because they want to think about how they can create and facilitate space, whether that's work-live spaces, whether that's gallery spaces, mixed-use space. And instead of it always being about relying on business people or real estate people to tell them how it is, give them the tools so that they can do it themselves and create their own spaces in meaningful ways. And then on the second day, it's going to really be a lot around convening. So we're bringing in this community vitality and placemaking group from Extension so that they can show how their process works and how they go into communities when they've been invited in to help them think about what they call asset mapping. So, you know, we talked about that one remark that was, you know, the one asset that every community has is artists, because you might be in a landlocked area, you might be on you might be on water. We all have different attributes, but the one thing that all communities share is having artists and having that beauty around them. So how do we think about how we can both place make, if you will, but I think the other thing that we didn't get a chance to talk a lot about is place keeping, and that is, it's hard for, I don't ever use the word discovery because discovery in the work that we do really implies colonization, you know, as if it wasn't there before until I found it, right? I don't know that capture is a much better word, but it was a quote, so I had to use it. But I love this idea of place keeping, which is a group of people know that they have this wonderful, beautiful asset, and they want to know how can we keep it, how can we grow it, how can we make it stronger, and how can you help us do that? So thank you for asking.
Sorry, just to build on what we've been saying before, because I mean, you know where I'm coming from. One of the things which worries me about these things, I'm in two minds about these, that as you were just saying now, if you have a placemaking, like for example, I remember when I came to the symposium, the Wisconsin Idea Symposium, or whatever it was. What was it? When we go on a bus all over.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember coming to La Crosse, and there were that nice sort of, you know, mural, and I was so pleased about it. To me, it was too nice, and it drove me crazy because it was too nice, and you know, it looked too good, and I say, hee. So but I mean, you know how I am. But I kept thinking, what if someone else? It seems to me like a bit of a colonizing by the kind of, you know, killing me by kindness. In a way that what about a society? It can't, that society can't be that nice. What about all those other voices which don't get the time, or should they be given the opportunity to kind of bring out their voices, which may not be that consonant, may not be that pacifying to the community. I mean, you just said it, it's a form of colonization. Do you think that we're institutionalizing the arts in these communities to the extent that it could become problematic? Because I've seen it happening elsewhere, that's what I'm saying, you know. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, trying to bring in an artist in some council estate in Britain, which is falling apart, make it look good, but actually the people are still living in a miserable life. So, I mean, and then the whole tower burns down, and then suddenly we realize there was nothing about it. I'm not shooting it down, don't get me wrong.
I understand what you're saying, and I think it's just, again, it's all about perspective, right? I mean, for me, the perspective that I came into the work from, and when I say the work, I'm trying to study it, I'm trying to expose my students to it, I'm trying to facilitate it, but I'm not the artist that's practicing it. I'm documenting what the artist is doing. And I want to find ways for artists to see how their work can be, how their work can be even more proliferate in their communities. I want them to have more opportunities than they have perhaps right now. So, I mean, I would hope that what I feel like I'm trying to do is steward and to I hate the word empower, but expose opportunity for people that want to take it. And that's the other thing, it's the wanting. You know, I may look at a community and see a group of people that I don't think have voice, but if they don't invite me in because they don't have voice, then is it my place to say, you seem to have a problem, can I help you come in and fix that? You know, so it really is a line, and I'm not saying that we always know when we're crossing over it, but it's better perhaps to try and fail than to not try at all, so,
So long
I'm a bit of an outlier here, both geographically, because I'm way on the west side where the wolves and the train barely goes. But I'm from the Ebling Library. My name's Michaela, and I'm the curator of rare books and special collections there. And I have myriad amounts of things to say about all of this, but one of the things I want to say is to let you know I'm there. And that the collection goes back to the 15th century. It's kind of a mini special collections with a huge emphasis in anatomy, public health, women's health, health sciences, but also my religion for the last 7, 8, 10 years has been to share it beyond that discipline. And so we have people like the Bone Folders Guild who are bookbinders who come and not technically deconstruct the 16th century bindings, but they're already deconstructed, and so they look at those. All various disciplines in history, Italian, French, law, etc., come and look at them. People who are interested in typesetting, engravings, lithography, mesoprints, paper itself, etc. Faisal has been to look at it. I recently worked with Marina on something. And so just so that you know it's there, but also that accessibility question is as much as what the researcher is asking, the curator, and whether that's from experience or temperament, needs to push out the artifacts and use them not only as their content, which is basically what a library is for, but for their value as an artifact that tells a myriad of stories, that a book not only tells you what's inside, but also who might have owned it, what artists worked on it, etc., etc. So, and not to be a gatekeeper, that balance that Maria was talking about in terms of we're protecting this, but we also want to share it. And so there's a lot to be said for a lot of the collections on campus that people just don't even know about, and ours is one of them. So, talk to me.
No, thank you, Michaela. I just wanted to say, I know we're at time, you're welcome to stay and keep chatting, but I just wanted to give everyone else.